the problem with Jon Stewart, which I thought that all of the tweets about his new interview were accounts that didn't like him, because frankly, the video that is being shown that he's proudly displaying on his new show, The Problem with Jon Stewart, unfortunately reveals at least a problem with Jon Stewart, and it's not great. So you're flinching.
Well, I mean, we will get there. Let's get to the particular interview.
So we don't yet in this setup have an ability for me to show what's on my screen. So I'm just going to summarize. He's interviewing the Attorney General of Arkansas, Leslie Rutledge, who's a Republican woman, and he asks her why she would go against the medical consensus from these reputable medical associations. It's the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Endocrine Society. Why she would have moved to have go into law, going against the medical consensus that apparently this consensus being transing children is totally fine. And am I using trans as an intransitive verb? Is that possible?
An intransigent verb.
Yes. But yeah, so Arkansas has said, actually, no, you got to be an adult before you can have any of these procedures done to you, before you can go on puberty blockers, before you can have cross-sex hormones, before you can have surgery to have healthy body parts removed or created out of other flesh, which are the three major medical interventions that the medical community is currently, in many places, just seemingly quite excited about and fine with. And in this interview, the Attorney General of Arkansas is back on her heels. She's not a scientist, and she doesn't have all of her sheaf of papers with her in this interview, and doesn't have an answer to his questions. Which doctors did you talk to, and why would you go against medical consensus? But he says, Jon Stewart compares a child declaring themselves trans to a child being diagnosed with cancer, and he says if the AMA, if the American Medical Association says, okay, with this type of cancer that your child has been diagnosed with, you really need chemotherapy, would you, as the Attorney General of the state of Arkansas, ever think to say, actually, we're not going to allow that until you're an adult? And the correct response there is, John, the belief of a child that they are not the sex that they were born to is not the same as a diagnosis of cancer. It's a fundamentally and totally different thing. In what way? In a lot of ways. One of them is that cancer is not a social construct. Okay? You are the sex that you were born. Very few people have a very unfortunate and deeply held and long held sense that they would be better off presenting to the world as the sex that they were not born. As adults, if they choose to transition to presenting to the world as the sex that they are not, they are free to do so. It is a social condition. That is not the same thing as cancer. Now, that doesn't even get into whether or not what the AMA or the American Academy of Pediatrics is currently recommending for particular childhood cancers is 100% obviously the right thing just because they're recommending it. They'll get things wrong. That's the nature of science. That's the nature of medicine. So, A, don't you dare compare a child declaring himself a girl or herself a boy to a diagnosis of cancer. And B, the idea that authorities who have been respected and are currently making mistakes across the board are the only arbiters of truth, well, that is the error of the modern era, isn't it? It is the error of the modern era. This is exactly what we're doing. We are pretending that science doesn't exist, that authority is what exists, and authority is now a replacement for science. And that is the error that Jon Stewart makes in this interview. And I have a few more things to say, but I'm sure you want to jump in here.
Yeah, well, I wanted to just point out that there are genuinely difficult questions in this neighborhood. This isn't one, right? What you do when a parent does not believe in so-called Western medicine or is, religiously prohibited from employing it, and they have a child sick with a curable disease, right? That's a genuinely difficult question because really, children are children for a reason, and their parents are supposed to look out for their interests. And to the extent that a parent has a belief system that prevents the the treatment of a disease that is survivable because of a relationship with a spirit world that we cannot test or verify or any of those things, that's difficult. In the case where, we just know too much about this, right? We know that lots of people have a period of gender dysphoria that just simply clears up with time. And even to the extent that there is a real argument, if you're one of the tiny number of people who are actually trans, that actually transitioning early is a good thing to do, the problem is we don't know who is really truly trans and who is suffering from a temporary sense of dysphoria. And therefore, the idea that if you're just very compelled that this is where you are, that you can transition with the help of modern medicine, that is an abuse of the doctor-patient relationship. And as you allude to, at this moment, we can see that medicine is not serving us well. It is not giving us advice that is good about what we should and shouldn't do. And in fact, it has been drafted into a political campaign to portray certain treatments as good, even as the evidence mounts that they are in fact net negative.
Yes, so, and a point to which we have talked and we will come back to today.
Yes, but just what is the reasonable thing to do in a world where trans exists? Yes, trans people often have a strong indication of this early in life, but many of the people who think they have a strong indication, in fact, turn out not to be permanently in this state. Right. What is the correct thing to do? The correct thing to do is to act with caution. What does caution look like? It looks like not making permanent changes. Yes. Those changes include, as we've discussed frequently, hormonal changes, surgical changes. These are things that shouldn't be done because reversing them is not possible.
Yep.
Or not fully possible.
And despite what some medical organizations still contend, you can't just halt puberty and then restart it without any effects. That's simply not true. And anyone who gave any thought to what the human organism is would have understood that from the beginning. So here's a quote from Stewart in this interview with Rutledge, the Attorney General from Arkansas. Quote, "You're suggesting that protecting children means overriding the recommendations of the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the Endocrine Society." So I would counter Jon Stewart with this. On what basis are those three organizations overriding hundreds of millions of years of evolution? Where did they get their authority? Authority is not the basis on which science works, but at the very least, organizations that are pretending to be medical and therefore ought to be scientific in nature need to be considering what it is that we are. We are organisms that have been evolving on this planet for billions of years. We have been mammals for over 100 million-ish, something like that. And our hormonal systems are that ancient. They're in fact older, but the vertebrate hormonal systems are older than that. And the idea that people can come in and say, it's fashionable now to believe children when they say they're a boy, a girl who says they're a boy, but not a girl who says she's a turtle. Maybe it's just because we don't have the facility yet to turn someone into a turtle, but we can make you kind of look like a boy, so let's do it. This is insane. So I'm actually going to read the first just couple paragraphs from my natural selections this week, if I may. This is called "What Do Girls Do?" Subtitle is "Girls Become Women." There is an 8-year-old girl who likes to play in streams and look under rocks for squirmy critters. She not only knows how to throw a ball, but enjoys doing it. She loves math and logic and has no interest in dolls or dresses. She will grow up to be a woman, because that's what girls do. There was another 8-year-old girl who likes to give tea parties for her stuffed animals. She likes to dance all the dances, often with other girls who like to do the same thing. She loves to read and has no interest in trucks or trails. She will also grow up to be a woman, because again, that's what girls do. One of these girls may want to be an astronaut, the other a chef, or a mother, or a lawyer, an actress, a race car driver. Are all of these desires equally likely among girls? They are not. Girls are likely to want some things more than others. But guess what? The girls who aren't girly are still girls. You can tell in part by the fact that they grow up to be women, because that's what girls do. Sex isn't assigned at birth. Sex is observed at birth. So of the three organizations that Jon Stewart keeps coming back to, I spent a little bit of time on their sites. The American Association of Pediatrics site seems to be in the middle of maybe trying to put a bunch of stuff behind walls, so I'm not going to spend any time there. The Endocrine Society has posted a number of things, including its 2017, quote, gender dysphoria / gender incongruence guidelines resources. And the second of two essential points that they post in this, again, I cannot show my screen, but this is again 2017 gender dysphoria, gender incongruence guidelines from the Endocrine Society. The second essential point that they make, what they're calling essential points, is as follows. Gender dysphoric / gender incongruent persons should receive a safe and effective hormone regimen that will suppress the body's sex hormone secretion, determined at birth and manifested at puberty, and maintain levels of sex steroids within the normal range for the person's affirmed gender. That's incoherent. And it elides, it is trying to point out that actually what you are born as is what your body proceeds to make you out to be. And we now have the technology to get in the way of that to some degree, not fully and not without a lot of cost. But people should receive a safe and effective hormone regimen that will suppress the body's sex hormone secretion determined at birth and manifested at puberty. Your sex hormones are not determined at birth. Your sex isn't determined at birth. Your sex isn't assigned at birth. Your sex, again, is observed at birth. And it doesn't just manifest at puberty, it manifests in utero and in early toddlerhood, and again, in more dramatic ways that everyone is familiar with who's gone through it at puberty. But there's nothing about a doctor having come in and said, yeah, you. It's like they've imagined it's like the Sorting Hat from Harry Potter.
What was their term for what happens at birth?
It's incoherent. It's an incoherent sentence. I'm just going to read the sentence again because it really doesn't make sense. And this is, again, the essential point, the second essential point in the guidelines that are still the standing guidelines from 2017 on how we treat gender, what is their phrase? Gender dysphoria / gender incongruence from the Endocrine Society, one of the three main professional organizations that Jon Stewart keeps hammering. Quote, gender dysphoric / gender incongruent persons should receive a safe and effective hormone regimen that will suppress the body's sex hormone secretion, determined at birth and manifested at puberty, and maintain levels of sex steroids within the normal range for the person's affirmed gender.
Okay, determined at birth. This is a scientific / medical society that thinks anything about that individual is determined at birth.
There you go.
That is a non-medical, non-scientific judgment that appears to be a way of acknowledging that there is something inherent to this being, but not wanting to raise questions about whether or not there is a being with rights prior to birth, having to do with a completely other discussion. Right? This is insane, right?
Yep.
What happens at birth is that the individual goes from inside another body to the outside world. That's what happens at birth. Nothing about hormones is determined.
The lungs start working, and there's some bawling, and
there's a lot of stuff, right? It's an event for sure, but it is not a determinate event in the hormonal life of this creature.
I mean, once again, it's a postmodern view of humanity. It's a doctor, a midwife, a doula, whatever. Someone came in and said, I pronounce you a boy. And there, they made him a boy. And if a different doula had come in, or midwife or doctor, whatever, and said, I pronounce you a girl, boom, that person would have been a girl. Not how it works. Everyone knows it. Why are we letting these people pretend? And how is it that the major medical organizations have been so captured that now they've confused one of what was once the most important commenters on cultural news of the day, that to resist the insanity and frankly the child abuse that is happening is itself anti-scientific. You got it backwards, John. You got it backwards.
Well, okay. So I want to come back then to what's going on with Jon Stewart, because I quite like the guy, I have to say, but this is not the first place where we have seen him wade into the issues of the modern era in a ham-fisted fashion. So anyway, I want to point out a couple things here. One, what we know and what anybody who watches this podcast or a good number of other podcasts knows is that organizations are being pressured into saying things that violate their original mission, right? The ACLU is now a threat to civil liberties because it has embraced a political ideology.
But it can't be, because it still has the word civil liberties in its name.
Well,
so it can't.
But I want to give Jon Stewart his due. A, there's a reason that he is what he is, which is that he's a very likable, very smart guy. Mm-hmm. My sense is he's a very likable. He's got courage. He does, and he's also earned life's equivalent of tenure, where he now is so wealthy that he doesn't really have to worry about what happens to him. He may not like it if people say nasty things about him, but they can't touch him, right? So the question is, why is he not playing a more useful role given what he is and who he is and what we all think his instincts are? Yep. And the problem is that if you have been, again, I don't know how many years he was doing The Daily Show, but if you have had a gig in which you are adored by millions and you have a great deal of control over what your show looks like, if you've had that sweet relationship with the universe, not entirely unlike the sweet relationship that we had with our teaching jobs, right? Mm-hmm. Where we got to decide what we wanted to teach, how we wanted to teach it. Nobody was in a position to tell us, differently, right? That was a pretty good deal. If you have a deal like that, and then the world has changed and it intrudes into your life, you may not understand that the ACLU has gone from one of the last fail-safes protecting civil liberties to a threat to civil liberties, because of course it still has the same looking website and same acronym and all of that. So what I think is going on with Jon Stewart is he has the sense that the world that he more or less exited when he went into that sweet gig of his can't have changed that much, right? The ACLU can't be the inverse of the ACLU, right? That would be crazy. Racists may have changed, but the nature of racism hasn't inverted, right? So if you come back out with a sense that things must be sort of like you remember, and then you try to make sense of, well, who are the people who are being oppressed because everybody's too old-fashioned to accept, the lot in life that biology has handed them? Obviously, trans people, and I don't even disagree with that. I think it's even true, but the problem is, if you think trans people face a very difficult road based on some quirk of biology, and you don't understand that trans activists and trans people are actually two different phenomena, right? And that trans activism is now orders of magnitude more people than actual trans folks struggling with the difficulties that situation puts you in, then you think, well, all right, these people need a defense, and I'm going to come out and give that defense. And it can't be all that unclear what that defense should be. Let's just look what the medical science says. And then you end up with these medical societies, and you don't understand that they've been captured by something. And even if they know better, they can't manage to say it publicly because they'd be destroyed. So if that world is just different enough from the one that you last had to interact with, then you can't fathom how different things are. You can't see that in order to figure out what medical science thinks, you can't go to the medical societies.
Okay, yeah, but...
All right.
There's a reliance on organizations' conclusions over thinking it through for yourself. What your own eyes tell you, what your own logic can reveal if you just think carefully about it. That's the way of science. And that's the way that all of us, no matter what your degree is or is not, or what you call yourself, or how bad you think you were at logic or math or whatever in school, all of us have the capacity for that level of scientific instinct. I've made an observation. I'm going to see if I can falsify it. I'm going to see if I can render it untrue by anything else that I can find out in the universe. And if I can't, I'm going to continue to think that that thing is true, even if the authorities come at me with bludgeons and hammers and pitchforks. And instead, from Jon Stewart, and as we're going to see here, definitely from these organizations, including the American Medical Association, what we have is, we're sure, sorry, my computer is threatening to shut itself down. It can't take it. Can't take it anymore. What we have from these organizations and from the people who are parroting them is, we've done the work, you don't have to. And in fact, you can't. We're not going to let you get anywhere near trying to do the work for yourself, and we're going to tell you you're engaging in malinformation, whatever it is. We've done it. Trust us. That's our job. And you know what? That's never been the job of anything on behalf of a populace. A populace, all of us, have to be able to, encouraged to, and actually feel encouraged in and of our own selves to question any pronouncements that come down from such agencies and authorities. And having an argument be based entirely on, but they said, it's not an argument.
So
and he's smarter than that.
Of course he is. That's my point. He's smarter than that, but he's not engaging his intellect in the right way to see it. And frankly, I don't know that he's going to see this or not. But if he does, he ought to look at what you've revealed about the claim by this society of endocrinologists that something endocrinologically important is happening at birth that couldn't have been determined 7 minutes before, right?
Right.
Jon Stewart knows enough biology to look at that and say, wait a minute, why is an endocrinological society claiming that birth is the moment at which your hormones are chosen?
And that sentence that I read from the Endocrine Society's 2017 report, which is its most modern report that I found on their resources for gender dysphoria, they say nothing. It's like the most clear they get.
Right.
They don't go into anything about the sudden rise in gender and transgender identification, whether this might be a symptom, the underlying cause for which should be addressed, as opposed to, let's facilitate the fantasy that that you are something you're not. That's not what doctors are supposed to do.
So, several things are true. One, there's a clue right here that something has gone on with at least this one society. And our claim will be, if you look at all of them, you're going to find the same evidence. You're going to find evidence that these folks are speaking a political truth and they are disguising it as a scientific truth. And the point is, what happened, John? Well, you had societies that, look, they were always a mixed bag, right? That's what happens when people get together and they have a certain amount of power to declare things. But what is supposed to be true of these societies is that they are supposed to be taking the information, which is scientifically generated, and the authority that they have is A, supposed to be limited, right? Authority is not how science works. And B, it is supposed to follow from what is discovered through the scientific process. What has happened is that somebody has taken the authority that was earned through scientific study and is now using that to broadcast something else. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Mm-hmm. It is a Trojan horse. But the point is, you cannot go to the ACLU and find out, where civil liberties are being threatened. You cannot go to the AMA and find out what the latest medical science is telling us about your well-being and how to cater to it, right? You cannot go to, the American Psychological Society and discover, what the state of gender science is. That isn't possible anymore, and nobody is saying that that's safe. The absence of functional societies that would allow us to figure out what the cutting edge was telling us, but that's nonetheless where we find ourselves. And I would offer one other piece of evidence that I hope will trigger Jon Stewart to reinvestigate his position. You and I have said frequently on DarkHorse that not only is trans a real phenomenon that a tiny number of people exhibit, but it is also an ancient phenomenon which we know because it is seen in many different cultures. And the distinction between what is being said now, right, to have medical societies saying that what naturally follows from the needs of trans people is intervention, flies in the face of the truly trans-supportive position, which is, look, this is a real phenomenon that is long-standing and exists in many, if not all, cultures, right? The fact that these medical societies are claiming something very new, something very aggressive in the intervention is necessary to treat trans people honorably, flies in the face of the history and prehistory of transness, which is not well understood. But nonetheless, Jon Stewart ought to be thinking, well, wait a minute. If it is true that transness is ancient, why is modern technology necessary to treat trans people well? Is this a mistake or is it not a mistake? And do these people have any idea what the downstream consequences of the interventions that they are advocating are? You know, do they have a plan for the large number of people that we know experience dysphoria early and end up with perfectly standard gender identity later in life, right? These are all really important questions.
Yeah, and I think actually one more point from this Endocrine Society document is that they they say gender dysphoria / gender incongruence. And gender dysphoria is a sense that you need to be presenting to the world as the sex that you are not. Gender incongruence is a regressive idea from the 50s, frankly, not that anyone was calling it then, that if you're a tomboy or a girl who likes to do boy-typical things, or if you're a boy who likes to do girl-typical things, then that's gender incongruence, and you need medical intervention to cure you of that. Now, if gender incongruence is being kind of equilibrated with or equated with gender dysphoria, at least being lumped in here, that is a regressive, nasty, frankly, not at all until yesterday, anything close to a left-wing position. This is backwards. This is anti-woman, anti-feminist, anti-equality, anti-progress for all of us who would like to be able to have ourselves and our children and our children's children make decisions about how they want to be and what they want to do in the world based on their proclivities and their capabilities, not based on the sex they are. Just because I was a lot more like that first girl in the paragraph of the piece that I read than that second girl, I was much more likely to be, come home covered in dirt and want to talk math than want to have a tea party for any of my friends. Doesn't mean I thought I was a boy, I wanted to be a boy. Doesn't mean I should have been a boy. Certainly doesn't mean someone should have come along and said, let's stop puberty for you and see what you're going to turn out to be. Nope. Always a girl. Always going to be a girl, always going to be coming into a woman. And yes, some people who experience that do turn out to be gay. Very, very, very few of them do turn out to be trans. Tiny, tiny, tiny number. And a lot of them turn out to be straight women or straight men who just don't follow the stereotypes. And the idea that we're medicalizing not following stereotypes is regressive as fuck.
Yeah, it is ultra regressive. And actually, this ought to be the wake-up call for a guy like Jon Stewart, is the obviously liberal, progressive, open-minded thing is what you are born as does not require you to behave in any particular way. You should be free to choose those things, and we should not be surprised if there are asymmetries in what gets chosen by people of different sexes. But, how much better is the world now that that the fact that you're born a girl doesn't mean you can't aspire to be an engineer, right? We all like that world better, right? Mm-hmm. You do, don't you, Jon Stewart? So if you like that world better, then the last thing you want to see is this, spasm of reactionary gender nonsense where, we're going to diagnose you as having a pathology that's in need of medical intervention because you manifest tendencies that didn't match the color that your parents painted the nursery that you spent your toddlerhood in or whatever.